The late winter wind swept across Chicago's skyline, rattling the glass walls of Brown Enterprises headquarters on the 45th floor. Inside a pristine office of steel and white marble, Christopher Brown, age 42, stood with hands clasped behind his back. Tall at 6'3", athletic in build, and with dark hair flecked by a hint of grey at the temples, he surveyed the city beneath him. His ice-blue eyes held a detached calm that matched the silent elegance of his surroundings. Not a single personal photograph or memento broke the immaculate order. Only the sleek desk, a few architectural models, and the endless windows revealing a city that he both dominated and held at a distance. He reviewed a portfolio of high-rise projects that symbolized his climb from a humble background on Chicago's South Side to the pinnacle of real estate success. Profits soared, stockholders cheered, and employees feared him just enough to maintain efficiency. Yet, as Christopher flipped through each page, his expression remained impassive. Those gleaming towers, each more extravagant than the last, seemed to cast an emotional chill over his soul, one he tried not to acknowledge. Outside his office, Sandra Miller, 58 years old, hair in a neat grey bun and a determined tilt to her chin, quietly managed the bustle of the executive floor. Sandra had served as Christopher's assistant for 15 years, an anchor in a realm of perpetual flux. As she stepped into his office, her slender frame carried a silent authority. "Sir," she began, in a voice that balanced respect and gentle candor, "the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Shall I bring the updated presentations?" Christopher turned from the window. "Yes, Sandra, and let's keep it quick." His tone was polite, but decidedly cool. Sandra nodded, then added, "I was thinking we could highlight a few community outreach ideas. It might show—" He raised a hand to cut her off, his jaw tightening. "We have more pressing priorities," he stated, effectively ending the topic. Sandra pressed her lips together. She had tried for months to nudge him toward more socially conscious projects, suspecting a shred of idealism still lingered beneath his polished exterior. But as usual, her suggestions were set aside. Minutes later, Christopher strode into the grand conference room, where the skyline became a panoramic backdrop. Designers and department heads sat around a long mahogany table as he began the meeting with his trademark efficiency. They discussed expansions into new markets and ways to trim budgets. A young architect dared to propose a small-scale housing initiative for lower-income families. Christopher's expression hardened. "We focus on what elevates our brand," he said, voice resonating with finality. "Social projects don't keep us profitable." A hush followed his proclamation. Sandra, seated at the far end of the table taking notes, glanced up, her eyes reflecting disappointment. The young architect fell silent. The meeting marched on, filled with Christopher's directives and the subdued acquiescence of his team. Beneath the professional veneer, a vague restlessness pulsed in Christopher's chest, though he could not name its origin. As the meeting concluded, an unexpected announcement caught everyone's attention. Arthur Sanders, one of the firm's principal architects, had just resigned to join a competing company. Whispers echoed around the table. Christopher's brow furrowed, and a flicker of anger crossed his typically impassive features. He prided himself on retaining top talent. For a moment, tension pressed into the conference room's opulent stillness. After dismissing his team, Christopher lingered with Sandra at the table. "Set up interviews," he instructed, voice firm. "Find me someone who can fill Sanders's spot, and do it quickly." "Yes, sir." Sandra rose, smoothing her tailored blazer over her trim figure. She watched Christopher's face, searching for any hint of deeper emotion. But as usual, his expression revealed nothing beyond controlled determination. She quietly left, already planning how to screen candidates capable of matching Christopher's high standards. When evening rolled in and the rest of the staff trickled out, Christopher remained alone in his office, lights dimmed. The glowing city spread below, yet the view that had once symbolized triumph seemed strangely hollow. He pressed a hand against the cool glass, remembering the cramped South Side apartment where he grew up. That boy who had vowed never to feel powerless again now stood at the top, isolated by his own success. Outside, the towers flickered with life. Inside, Christopher felt a subtle pang he would not name. He finally turned away, locking up for the night with the unsettling realization that a sophisticated empire built sky-high could still feel achingly empty. The following morning, Christopher Brown entered human resources with purposeful strides, prepared for the second round of interviews. The seat left by Arthur Sanders had proven difficult to fill. Most candidates either lacked the design acumen or the nerve to handle Brown Enterprises' uncompromising standards. But the director of HR, Richard Taylor, a short, heavy-set man of 51 with a penchant for flashy neckties, assured Christopher that this next applicant was someone exceptional. Stepping into the glass-walled interview room, Christopher eyed the portfolio that lay neatly in front of a slender woman. Megan Carter, 36, rose to greet him. She was of medium height, around 5'5", with an understated elegance, warm brown hair skimming her shoulders and calm green eyes that seemed to hold entire worlds. She wore a simple navy blazer and skirt, her demeanor poised but modest. Christopher offered a curt nod, signaling the interview to begin. Richard cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, please walk us through your background." Megan opened her portfolio and spoke in a voice that was steady, though tinged with quiet passion. She described her experience designing community centers in Kansas City, focusing on sustainability and aesthetics that honored local cultures. Her slides revealed bright, inviting buildings with green roofs, natural light, and playful layouts. Christopher found himself oddly drawn in, not just by the architecture, but by the depth of her conviction. "So you emphasize sustainability," Christopher remarked, flipping through her drawings. "We typically focus on commercial developments. How do you see yourself adapting to that?" Megan straightened her shoulders. "I believe creative, responsible design can bring long-term value, even in purely commercial spaces," she said gently. "There's a balance between profitability and social impact." She left it at that, neither apologizing nor pushing further. Something about her tone was too composed, as if well rehearsed. Christopher glanced at her resume. He noticed a gap in her employment history that she explained as time off for personal reasons. The usual curiosity about her personal life flickered in his mind, though he kept his expression neutral. "Our environment is demanding," Christopher said. "We work late when necessary, collaborate with diverse teams, and adapt quickly to project changes." Megan nodded. "I can meet deadlines," she replied calmly. "Though I do prefer clarity in planning. My strength is in conceptual design, but I'll do whatever it takes to deliver." Richard, adjusting his bright purple tie, tried to steer the conversation toward the typical HR questions, but Christopher's attention remained on Megan's subtle composure. He asked about her architectural inspirations, admired the breadth of her portfolio, and noted that none of her personal details crept into the discussion. Usually, candidates dropped hints of their hobbies or families, some friendly anecdote to connect on a human level. Megan offered none. As the interview neared its end, Christopher posed one final question. "Why our firm?" Megan's lips curved into a slight smile. "Your commercial success is undeniable," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I'd like to explore how design, innovation, and sustainability might be woven into that success. There's untapped potential in bridging both worlds." Christopher observed her for a moment that felt longer than it was, a subtle tension building. Something about Megan Carter was different. He couldn't shake the impression she was both exactly who she seemed and yet completely unknowable. When Megan left the room, Richard lowered his voice. "We have other promising candidates lined up," he began, but Christopher closed the portfolio with a decisive snap. "Hire her. I want her on the team." Richard blinked. "Mr. Brown, are you sure? We usually do at least 2 final interviews." "I'm sure," Christopher responded. "She's got the skill set we need." He rose, gathering his notes. His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. Outside in the corridor, Megan paused by the elevator, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She knew Christopher Brown's reputation, a brilliant CEO with a formidable temper and zero tolerance for inefficiency. That she had impressed him enough to secure the job in one meeting left her both relieved and uneasy. Her green eyes flickered with an indecipherable mix of resolve and something akin to regret. Back in his office, Christopher silently sifted through Megan's designs once more. His measured, methodical mind tried to classify her among the countless architects who had passed through these halls. Yet she eluded easy definition. A spark of admiration, perhaps curiosity, flickered within him. For the first time in a long while, he felt an unexplainable stir that made him wonder what lay beyond polished portfolios and polite formalities. Sunlight bounced off the downtown towers as Christopher arrived at the office earlier than usual. A sense of restlessness had taken root in him since hiring Megan Carter. He seldom fixated on a single employee, but her presence had stirred an undercurrent of curiosity he couldn't ignore. He brushed aside the unsettled feeling as he stepped into the open-concept workspace where a handful of architects already clustered around drafting tables. Megan worked quietly at her station, tapping a pencil against her lips as she reviewed layouts for a new shopping center project. Her brown hair was pinned back, and the concentration in her green eyes made her seem almost unaware of the chatter around her. Yet Christopher noticed how she politely declined the small talk from Jennifer White, an energetic project manager of 34 with bright blonde hair, every time Jennifer invited her to grab coffee or lunch. Christopher stood near the large glass walls, quietly observing the dynamic. Michael Johnson, 39, a tall and affable architect with a knack for forging camaraderie, attempted to draw Megan into conversation about the building's facade. She engaged in work-related exchanges, but sidestepped any personal chit-chat. At precisely noon, she slipped out for a quick lunch alone, returning exactly 30 minutes later, resuming her tasks with calm efficiency. That evening, as most of the team prepared to stay late tackling a looming deadline, Christopher noticed Megan packing her laptop right at 5:06 p.m. He tapped his watch. "We still have a lot to finish," he said, voice low. "It might require an extra hour or 2. Megan hesitated. "I understand, Mr. Brown. I've worked through the tasks assigned to me, and I can come in early tomorrow if needed." Her tone was respectful but firm, as though no further negotiation was possible. Then she smiled politely and left, leaving Christopher watching the elevator doors close behind her. The next day, a similar pattern emerged. Megan arrived promptly at 8 m.m. Mbojidra immersed herself in her duties, contributed brilliant insights during brainstorming sessions, yet slipped away again at 5:15 p.m. exactly. Word began to circulate among the staff. Some speculated she had a second job. Others assumed she was simply uninterested in bonding with colleagues. Jennifer teased that Megan must have a secret nightlife. Michael joked that she was a clock watcher, though not unkindly. But Christopher found his curiosity mounting with each passing day. Late in the week, he invited the entire team to a nearby lounge for a group happy hour, a rare gesture on his part. Michael and Jennifer exchanged excited looks at the invitation. Christopher rarely joined social outings, but just as Christopher hoped Megan might finally join them, she declined with that same composed politeness. "I'm sorry, I have plans." she said softly. Then at exactly 5 o'clock, she slipped out as usual. That night, Christopher lingered longer than he intended at the lounge, half listening to chatter about design trends and potential new clients. His mind, however, drifted to Megan. He replayed her confident suggestions in meetings, her knack for weaving sustainability into commercial projects, her unwavering calm under pressure. More than that, he fixated on her seeming reluctance to engage in any personal interaction. She hadn't shared a single anecdote about her family or friends. Sandra, who had reluctantly joined the gathering, approached Christopher with a knowing look. "Mr. Brown," she said quietly over the music, "sometimes people have obligations outside work. It's not always a sign of disinterest." Christopher finished his mineral water, ignoring the twinge of discomfort in his chest. "I just want to ensure she's committed," he replied. "That's all." Sandra lifted an eyebrow. "Understood," she answered, though her tone suggested she saw right through him. After the drinks wound down, Christopher left for his penthouse, but sleep didn't come easily. He stared at the ceiling, remembering how Megan had pointed to a more socially responsible blueprint during a conference call earlier that day. She made a case for adding green space and community features to the shopping center design, even though the higher-ups might balk at the expense. She wasn't shy about introducing ideals he once secretly admired. In the darkness of his spacious, luxurious bedroom, Christopher felt a pinch of dissatisfaction. He had built his life around precision and control, from the firm's operations down to his own daily schedule. Yet here was Megan, slipping out daily at 5, refusing to mingle, and advocating ideas that chipped away at his rigid corporate strategies. He tapped his phone to check the time. Past midnight already. With a frustrated sigh, he realized something had shifted within him. An unexpected intrigue had taken hold, and he couldn't simply file it away like any other unresolved issue. Christopher stood in the corridor near the elevators, coat draped over his arm, heart pounding more than he cared to admit. The clock read 4:45 p.m. He was supposed to be in a meeting with potential investors, yet he found himself wavering over an entirely different plan, following Megan Carter after hours to see where she went so promptly every day. The very notion felt ethically dubious, if not outright invasive, but his curiosity had reached a level he could no longer ignore. He tried to tell himself it was professional concern. He needed to know if she was moonlighting for a competitor or facing personal issues that might interfere with her performance. But in truth, Christopher recognized a hint of unhealthy obsession. Standing at 6'3", meticulously dressed in a bespoke suit, he rarely found himself uncertain. His life was governed by logic, strategy, and an unyielding moral code that left no room for whims. Yet here he was, about to break his own rules. Sandra emerged from the opposite hallway. "Mr. Brown," she said, glancing at his coat. "The investor meeting starts in 10 minutes. I'll handle it tomorrow," he replied curtly. "Reschedule." Her eyes widened. "Sir?" "Reschedule," he repeated, tone edged with finality. Sandra nodded, surprised but too loyal to object. As Christopher turned toward the elevator, he felt her stare on his back. She was one of the few who dared worry about him in a personal capacity, and he sensed her concern. Still, his mind was set. Down in the parking garage, he usually found his driver, James Wilson, waiting near the black Mercedes. But Christopher waved James off with a tight smile. "I'll drive myself tonight." The older man, ex-military and devotedly discreet, offered a polite nod and stepped aside. Slipping behind the wheel, Christopher inhaled the scent of leather seats, steeling himself for what he was about to do. He watched the digital clock on the dashboard. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At exactly 5 p.m., Megan appeared by the garage exit, carrying her laptop bag, moving with a purposeful stride. She didn't glance around, Her attention fixed ahead, Christopher eased his car out of its spot and followed at a safe distance as she merged into Chicago's early evening traffic. His heart thudded with each turn. Why was he doing this? He half hoped she'd stop at a second job or a night class, anything that would make his pursuit seem reasonable. Instead, she drove toward a humbler neighborhood on the city's western edge, where the glitz of downtown gave way to older brick buildings and modest storefronts. Once or twice, Christopher nearly lost sight of her compact sedan. He clenched the steering wheel, determined not to lose track. When she finally parked outside a small grocery store, Christopher found a spot a short distance behind. He watched her exit the store, minutes later with a bag of groceries in hand. She then walked another block to a narrow apartment building in a working-class area. From across the street, Christopher quietly observed her climb the steps and vanish inside. He was left sitting alone in his luxury vehicle, feeling more like an intruder than ever before. He almost turned back right then. Conscience gnawed at him. He was crossing lines he had never even approached before, yet an irrational urge rooted him to the spot. He told himself just a few more minutes, then he would drive away, vow never to repeat such a breach of privacy. So he waited, listening to the purr of the engine in the fading evening light. His phone buzzed, a text from Sandra, reminding him the investors expected an update. He ignored it. Instead, he stared at the modest apartment building. A dim overhead light illuminated the front windows. Shadows occasionally moved across the thin curtains. What was she hiding? A partner, a child, a second life entirely. Christopher felt a surge of guilt. This was insane. He, a respected CEO, had just abandoned a crucial meeting to trail his new hire into a quiet neighborhood. If Megan discovered what he was doing, he could lose all credibility, not to mention her respect. His mind warred between stopping immediately and pressing on, torn by an intensity he couldn't rationalize. Then he saw movement through one of the windows. Megan's silhouette crossing the living room. Christopher's breath caught. This was real. This wasn't a fleeting office curiosity. His moral reservations flickered again, yet he could not bring himself to drive away. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would figure out a justification. But tonight, caught in a battle between ethics and longing, he let the moment hold him in silent suspension. A damp chill settled over Chicago as twilight deepened. Christopher waited, increasingly unsettled by the fact that he couldn't force himself to leave. His rational mind screamed that this was a breach of privacy, a line a man of his stature should never cross. Yet he remained, parked discreetly under a flickering street lamp across from Megan's building, scanning each window for a sign of her evening routine. After what felt like ages, he noticed the apartment lights brighten in a room on the second floor. Slivers of warm glow filtered through a partially open curtain. Christopher's heart hammered in a way he'd never experienced during high-stakes corporate negotiations. Carefully, he shut off the car's engine and slipped out, tucking himself behind a large tree that overlooked Megan's building from a safer distance. He peered through the softly lit window. The living room appeared cramped yet cozy, with walls displaying colorful drawings. Megan stood at a small table, setting down sheets of paper and an array of crayons or paintbrushes. He couldn't tell which. Then, before Christopher could question his next move, two tiny figures darted into view. He froze. Two little girls, identical twins, perhaps 6 years old, hurled themselves into Megan's arms, squealing with delight. Both had the same warm brown hair and the same piercing green eyes as their mother. Christopher's breath caught in his throat. He had never considered that Megan might be a mother. She'd concealed it so thoroughly during the interview and in the days since. The taller twin, or so it seemed from this distance, appeared to hand Megan a piece of paper covered in scribbles, while the other perched on her tiptoes, eagerly pointing to a corner of the living room. Megan followed them, retrieving rolls of paper and paint jars. Instantly, the space turned into an impromptu art studio. The children laughed, their voices muffled but still carrying a note of pure excitement. Christopher suddenly felt like a trespasser in the most sacred of spaces, a family's intimate evening routine. Yet he couldn't tear his gaze away. This woman he'd pegged as detached and mysterious was, in fact, devoting her entire after-work life to caring for her daughters. Tenderness radiated from her gestures. The way she brushed a stray lock of hair behind one child's ear, the way she guided the other's small hands as they dipped brushes into vibrant colors. A pang of guilt flooded him as he realized how drastically he had misjudged her. Then a new sensation crashed over him: recognition. Megan's husband, Daniel Carter, had died a few years ago in a construction accident on one of Brown Enterprises' sites. Christopher felt that detail slam into him like a physical blow. In the swirl of financial settlements and corporate protective measures, the names of victims' families often became lost in legal documents. But now, seeing Megan's face, seeing her children, whose father's death might be partly his burden to bear, he felt the weight of it all. He recalled hearing about that incident, a structural collapse during the final phase of construction, an investigation that led to multiple subcontractor disputes, countless legal disclaimers, and a settlement hush-hushed by the corporate machine. Christopher had personally skimmed the final settlement, never pausing long enough to consider the real lives behind the lines of text. Now, confronted by Megan's quiet resilience, it struck him with overwhelming force. His hand clenched around the rough bark of the tree. Part of him wanted to run up the steps, apologize, and confess he had no idea of her sorrow. Another part of him recognized the impossibility of that gesture, especially after he'd followed her here like a spy. He steadied his breathing, heart pounding so loud that he worried someone might hear. Through the window, Megan knelt beside her daughters, who were busy painting. A swirl of color brightened the otherwise modest room. With every brushstroke, Christopher felt a shard of his carefully constructed self crack. How had he, a man who prided himself on controlling every aspect of his business, overlooked something so profoundly human? Headlights flashed on the street, momentarily illuminating his hiding spot. Christopher shrank back, shame flaring in his chest. He darted behind the tree again, heart racing, until the car passed. Gazing one more time at the scene unfolding upstairs, he swallowed hard. Megan was smiling, the children giggling. It was an image of warmth he had rarely witnessed, let alone experienced. He returned to his Mercedes with unsteady steps, the guilt and shock thundering in his veins. He had found far more than he'd bargained for. Megan Carter was the widow of a worker who died on his project, a mother devoted to her children, and an extraordinary talent who carried her grief in silence. Tomorrow, he would face her at the office knowing this devastating truth and the questions it raised about who he'd become. As he started the engine, Christopher felt a shift within him that he could neither name nor ignore, a tremor deep enough to shake even the tallest tower. Christopher's pulse thudded against his temples as he huddled in his home office, surrounded by the sleek modern furnishings he once took pride in. Now, they felt cold and impersonal. The discovery that Megan Carter was the widow of a man who died on one of his construction sites weighed heavily on him. The official reports of that accident, so carefully sanitized by legal teams, had flashed before his eyes all night. He forced himself to dig into archived files, retrieving a digital folder labeled Carter, Daniel, Settlement. Guilt twisted his stomach when he opened it. Dry legal language described a tragedy at a Brown Enterprises project 3 years prior, an unstable scaffold, a rushed timeline, a single misstep ending in fatal collapse. Daniel Carter had been on site as one of the lead architects, personally overseeing final touches. Christopher's eyes stung with shame. He remembered breezing through the report at the time, dismissing it as an unfortunate incident caused by subcontractors. A wave of nausea compelled him to call George Peterson, his old mentor from architecture school. George D., now 68, lived in a modest apartment near campus and had guided Christopher from his early days. Christopher wasn't one to seek advice, but tonight he needed a voice of reason. "Chris, it's after midnight," George answered, his tone groggy. "You okay?" Christopher hesitated, grappling with a mix of anxiety and regret. "I learned something," he began, running a hand over his face. "One of my employees, her husband died in that construction accident a while back. My name's tied to it. My company. I'm not sure I handled things right." George let out a long, thoughtful sigh. "We talked about that project back then. Didn't I warn you about speeding through inspections?" "I delegated," Christopher said quietly. "We wrote checks. The lawyers handled the rest." He heard the bitterness in his own voice. "I never thought about who was left behind." In the silence that followed, Christopher remembered the day of the accident in sharper detail than he wanted. He recalled standing by half-erected beams, receiving a panicked phone call that a worker had been hurt, then letting his legal team contain the situation while he rushed to another meeting. A flashback seized him, the flutter of caution tape, a gurney being wheeled out, his own cold choice to keep forging ahead with the project. George cleared his throat. "You always had ambition, son, but ambition can blind us. Are you calling me now to find a loophole, or is there something more?" Christopher swallowed hard. "I think it's guilt," he admitted. "I see Megan every day, not knowing who she really was. She has kids, George, twins. They lost their father. And did I cause that loss?" George's voice softened. "Indirectly. But you can't rewrite the past. You can only decide what you'll do next. If you truly want to honor that man's memory, you'll find a way to use your position for more than just profit." Christopher's hand clenched around the phone. He thought of the proposed social housing plan he once dismissed. Megan had championed something similar in smaller forms. Was it too late to change? The conversation with George wound down after another few minutes of anguished reflection. When he finally ended the call, Christopher found himself staring at an old college sketch he'd long since tucked away. In it, he had drawn row houses with courtyards, children's playgrounds, and green spaces woven in. It was meant to blend affordability with dignity. He had shown that design to George years ago, brimming with excitement about helping neighborhoods like the one he grew up in. A harsh laugh escaped him. He had become the very sort of corporate kingpin he once despised, sacrificing ideals for a streamlined bottom line. Now, imagining Megan juggling her life as a single mother, he felt the full burden of that choice. He paced to the window, gazing at the city lights. They no longer glowed with the allure of triumph. Instead, they illuminated the cracks in his conscience. Tomorrow, he would face Megan at work with this new knowledge. No matter how deeply it cut, he owed her some form of acknowledgement. The night stretched on, but Christopher felt pinned in place by the weight of regret. Even if he couldn't atone for Daniel's death fully, perhaps he could start by doing something right, something that reflected the youthful dream he'd buried under steel and glass. Long after the call with George ended, Christopher found himself trapped in his penthouse's quietude, pacing from room to room. Each space was immaculate: white walls, polished floors, expensive art that lacked any emotional attachment. He stared at the glass coffee table in the living area, recalling how he once told a reporter that simplicity and minimalism defined him. Now he realized minimalism had simply become a shell, protecting him from personal connections. He collapsed onto the sleek leather sofa, dropping his head into his hands. Memories he had long suppressed came flooding back. He saw himself at 18, tall and lanky, standing in a threadbare living room in Southside Chicago. His mother, Elizabeth Brown, had multiple cleaning jobs to keep the lights on. He could almost smell the lingering scent of bleach on her faded uniform. She had always told him, "Education is your ticket out," her voice unwavering despite exhaustion etched in her face. He pictured her grin when he received a partial scholarship to study architecture. "You'll build beautiful places that help people," she'd said, pride shining in her eyes. Slowly, that memory melted into the day she passed away from a heart condition he hadn't known she had. He was a sophomore in college, drowning in grief and guilt for not noticing her deteriorating health. He had hurled himself into his studies and part-time jobs, vowing never to feel powerless again. He rose from the sofa and wandered to a tall cabinet in the corner of the living area. From behind carefully arranged files, he pulled out a weathered envelope. Inside lay faded photographs of his mother. In one, she stood in front of an old brick building she had dreamed of one day turning into an after-school center. Christopher's throat tightened. He had all but forgotten that vision. Suddenly restless, he flicked on a lamp and moved to a cedar chest near his bedroom window. From it, he retrieved his old college portfolio. Dust motes danced in the air as he flipped it open, revealing sketches done with cheap pencils on flimsy paper. They displayed an almost childlike optimism. Community gardens, integrated housing designs, and drawings of smiling families. He shut his eyes, remembering how excited he'd been, believing architecture could be a tool for genuine transformation. Somewhere along the line, that dream had twisted into building the tallest, most profitable skyscrapers. He had excelled at it too, earning recognition, money and influence, but had lost the heart of his original calling. Unbidden, Megan's face surfaced in his mind. Those steady green eyes that spoke of unspoken pain. If only he'd known she was Daniel's widow sooner, would he have treated her differently? But he suspected that was only part of the problem. The real issue was how he distanced himself from empathy for so long, letting legal teams handle tragedies and ignoring their human toll. He lingered by the window, gazing at Chicago's glow. Cars lined the streets far below, each occupant with a story, a life, a struggle. In his relentless pursuit of success, Christopher had walled himself off. Megan's situation had cracked that wall, revealing that behind every statistic or settlement was a human story, sometimes one intertwined with his own. Unable to rest, he called George again. It was nearly 2 a.m, but George answered with concern. "You all right, Chris?" "I can't sleep," Christopher admitted. "I'm staring at my old sketches. I feel like a different person back then." George let out a low hum. "Because you were... But that doesn't mean you can't find a way back to who you wanted to be." They spoke softly about the logistics of resurrecting socially responsible projects within Brown Enterprises. George reminded him how the spark of idealism could coexist with profitable endeavors if guided by sincerity, not mere PR. By the time Christopher hung up, his tension had ebbed slightly, replaced by the flicker of determination. As dawn broke, he placed the old sketches carefully on his desk, refusing to bury them again. Perhaps it was time to revisit the dreams he had once cherished. If not, he feared he'd never escape the restless nights that now tormented him. With the city coming to life outside, Christopher finally felt a sliver of clarity. Real change would require more than superficial gestures. He had to face the consequences of his past choices, own them, and do something truly meaningful. He folded his mother's photograph back into the envelope, whispering, "I'm sorry." For the first time in years, tears stung his eyes. And as the early light filtered through his penthouse windows, Christopher resolved to confront the man he'd become and try to honor the promise he once made to his mother. The next day, Sandra Miller could hardly recognize the man stepping off the elevator. Christopher typically arrived in a tailored suit, tie precisely knotted, and a perfectly pressed shirt. But this morning, he strode into the 45th floor corridor wearing a slightly more relaxed blazer, his top shirt button undone. Though hardly casual by most standards, it was a startling departure for him. "Good morning, Sandra," he said, voice quieter than usual but somehow warmer. She offered him a surprised smile, letting her gaze flick over his appearance. "We have a meeting in 15 minutes with the East Coast investors," she reminded him, half expecting him to snap to order. Instead, Christopher shook his head. "Reschedule them for tomorrow. I need to meet with the architectural team first. There's something important to discuss." Sandra's brows arched. "Certainly," she replied, scribbling a note. Her curiosity burned, but she knew better than to pry outright. Inside his office, Christopher paced briefly, glancing at the glass walls that reflected both his physical height and the metaphorical distance he maintained from others. He pressed the intercom, inviting Megan Carter to join him as soon as she arrived. The minutes felt like hours, but eventually Megan stepped in, portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mr. Brown," she greeted, just formal enough to signal the boundary between them. He noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, perhaps from balancing single motherhood with demanding deadlines. He cleared his throat. "Megan, good morning. Please sit." She took a seat across from him, her posture stiff. Christopher exhaled. He had planned to open with some carefully crafted words, but the sincerity he'd gained overnight urged him to speak plainly. "I've been reviewing an old design of mine. It's a conceptual plan for housing that offers both affordability and quality, something I once believed in." His voice wavered slightly. "I'd like you to take the lead on adapting it for a new project." Megan blinked, surprise flitting across her features. "Housing? As in affordable housing?" "Yes," Christopher affirmed. He eyed her with something akin to genuine respect. "We can approach the board, pitch it as a pilot program. I realize it might seem out of step with our usual commercial approach, but I want to give it a real chance." Megan carefully placed her portfolio on his desk. "I support that idea, but might I ask what prompted this shift?" Christopher hesitated. His guilt gnawed at him, especially after the realization that he was indirectly responsible for her husband's accident. He swallowed. "Let's just say I've been thinking about the company's direction. We've chased profitability for too long without considering the bigger picture. Your designs have real potential to change people's lives. I don't want to disregard that anymore." She studied his face, her green eyes revealing a flicker of guarded suspicion. Finally, she nodded. "If we can do this sincerely, if it's not a marketing ploy, I'm in." "Thank you," Christopher said softly. For the first time, he mustered a small, genuine smile that felt foreign on his usually impassive face. After Megan left, he summoned Sandra, Michael Johnson, and a few other senior staff to a quick meeting. At the conference table, Christopher stood at the head but refrained from his usual commanding posture. "We're resurrecting a social housing project," he announced. "Megan Carter will lead. We'll set aside a budget and resources to develop a full proposal." Thomas Reynolds, the slender, silver-haired CFO, frowned from across the table. "That's not on our financial roadmap." "The board—" "I'll handle the board," Christopher interrupted, though his tone lacked its typical cold edge. "We'll prepare a solid plan. I trust you all to help make it viable." Jennifer White and Michael exchanged curious glances, both intrigued. Sandra, eyes lighting up, discreetly jotted notes. As the meeting adjourned, Christopher caught Sandra's gaze, and she offered the faintest nod of approval. Stepping into the hallway, Christopher felt a rush of nerves. He had initiated a risky venture within his own company, one that might not sit well with investors, but for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of purpose. He thought of Megan's quiet determination and Daniel Carter's legacy, then remembered the social sketches he'd crafted in college. Perhaps this was his chance, however late, to do something that mattered. He inhaled deeply, letting the clamor of the office wash over him. The old Christopher Brown might have crushed any notion of community-focused development, but this new resolve was stronger than fear. Maybe transformation could begin with just one changed mind and one genuine act of service. Christopher stood at the threshold of Megan's workspace, hesitating before knocking on the glass partition. Inside, she leaned over a large drafting table, reading through environmental impact assessments. Afternoon light streamed across the colorful sketches she'd prepared, layered plans for green spaces, communal courtyards, and energy-efficient units. "Come in," she said without looking up, sensing his presence. Only after he stepped inside did she glance up, her expression cautious. "Mr. Brown, did you need something?" He swallowed. "Yes, I'd like to see your preliminary ideas for the housing project, and please call me Christopher if you'd like." Megan acknowledged his offer with a small nod, but still addressed him formally. "This layout captures some of the essential features: rooftop gardens, shared work areas, and designs that maximize natural light. I'm aiming for long-term sustainability." Christopher moved closer, scanning the vibrant details. "It's excellent," he murmured, surprised by genuine admiration swelling inside him. "I'd like you to present these concepts at the next senior meeting. We'll have to prepare for pushback from the board." "You're prepared to fight for this?" she asked, arching a skeptical brow. "Absolutely," he said. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "I can be convincing when I care about something." A flicker of emotion darted across Megan's face, an odd mixture of relief and wariness. Then she set down her pencil and faced him fully. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I want this to be more than token charity. If we start halfway and compromise all the best elements, we won't accomplish anything meaningful." Christopher nodded. "I agree. Show me the budget and design specs. We'll refine them and stand firm when the board questions every line item." She handed him a stack of documents. As he flipped through them, a hush fell between them. Finally, Megan ventured, "I recall reading about a similar proposal you had in the past. Did you really design a social housing project in college?" Christopher paused, remembering the old sketches he'd revisited in his sleepless haze. "I did," he admitted, "and then I shelved it. I let the pursuit of profit overshadow everything else." Her eyes softened slightly. "People change. Maybe it's the right moment to revive that dream." He cleared his throat, fighting back the urge to reveal everything, that he knew about her husband, that he'd discovered her secret life only by following her, that he felt personally responsible for her loss. Instead, he stuck to the professional realm. "We'll make sure the board sees the value. I want you to lead the pitch." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "Me? It's your firm." "Typically, the CEO would..." "Typically, yes," Christopher cut in. "But your passion for these designs is what sells them. I'll stand beside you, but your voice should be front and center." He could sense her hesitancy, though a glimmer of pride surfaced in her expression. "All right," she agreed, "but you'll need to prepare the CFO and the rest of the leadership. They won't just accept this quietly." "I've set a meeting for early next week," Christopher replied. "Send me any figures you still need. We'll craft a comprehensive proposal." She nodded, and for a moment something like a mutual respect passed between them, a fragile bridge spanning the gulf of unspoken truths. A hint of discomfort pinched Christopher's chest as he wondered how Megan would react if she knew he'd invaded her privacy. Collecting the papers, he said, "I'll review these by tomorrow. You can stop by my office if you want to discuss details." As he turned to leave, Megan spoke softly. I appreciate this chance, Mr. Brown. It's important work. It is, he replied, briefly meeting her gaze. He saw in her eyes a quiet resolve that resonated with the young dreamer he once was. Without another word, he exited. At his desk, Christopher pored over Megan's numbers well into the evening. Every cost, every materials line item, he studied them meticulously, making notes for how to defend each point to skeptical board members. For the first time in a long while, he felt excited about a project. Yet beneath that excitement, guilt and unease simmered. He wanted to tell Megan the truth, that he knew about Daniel Carter's death on his site, that he'd spied her life from a distance, but honesty seemed fraught with risk. If he lost her trust, he could jeopardize both the project and the fragile rapport they were building. He forced himself to focus on the immediate task. There would be a right moment, he reassured himself, to speak candidly. Until then, he'd fight for her vision. Perhaps that was a start toward redemption. Midweek arrived with a renewed hum of activity at Brown Enterprises. In a section of the office rarely used, Christopher had arranged a collaborative space for the newly formed project team. Wide tables were draped in sketches, sustainability charts, and miniature models. It was a place that thrummed with creativity, different from the staid environment of their usual boardrooms. Megan, leading the group, presented her preliminary ideas: smaller unit footprints to accommodate more families, integrated courtyards for social interaction, and rooftop gardens that reduced energy consumption. Michael Johnson, the 39-year-old senior architect with a welcoming smile, stood by her side, offering insights into structural feasibility. Thomas Reynolds, the CFO, lurked at the edge of the group, arms folded. His angular face betrayed skepticism. While Christopher hovered close by, ready to intervene, he gave Megan space to assert her authority, and she did so deftly, recommending adjustments to building materials and design elements without losing the project's essence. This approach might reduce cost overruns in the long term, she explained, pointing to a chart that compared traditional construction with eco-friendly alternatives. Though initial expenses can be higher, we can secure tax incentives and long-term savings. Thomas gave a curt nod. We'll see how the numbers look once we talk to suppliers, he muttered. He was hardly encouraging. But Christopher noticed how Thomas refrained from outright dismissal. Later that afternoon, Megan was still at her desk when Christopher approached. I've got an investor call at 4, but I'd like you to join. They have questions about the sustainability angle. She checked the time, 3:55 p.m. Of course. Let me just grab the latest projections. They settled into a smaller conference room. Over speakerphone, a potential investor grilled them about profit margins. Megan remained poised, citing evidence from pilot programs in other cities. Christopher backed her up with references to citywide incentives and the marketing potential of a socially responsible brand. When the call ended, Megan let out a breath of relief. They seemed more open-minded than I expected. Christopher nodded. That was good work. Honestly, you handled their concerns better than I would have. She offered a small, wry grin. Well, you've built a massive empire. I'm just trying to make sure this project doesn't get buried by the usual corporate demands. He suppressed a smile. I see a lot of potential in your approach, and I intend to see it through. But the moment was broken by the shrill ring of his cell phone. A glance at the screen showed Sandra calling. He excused himself, stepping out into the hallway. Sandra's voice came through with urgency. Thomas has arranged a meeting with several key directors. He's raising concerns about project profitability. Might be an attempt to push it off the table. Christopher's jaw clenched. I'll talk to him. Keep me posted. He ended the call to find Megan standing just behind him, concern etched on her face. Something wrong, He hesitated, contemplating how much to reveal. "There's resistance," he admitted. "Thomas is gathering allies. He's worried about the numbers." She sighed, casting her gaze down the corridor. "You told me this wouldn't be easy. I'm still in for the fight." Christopher felt a surge of pride at her determination. "I am too," he reassured. "We'll present a united front." That evening, the two stayed past sunset, combing through budgets and refining the pitch for an upcoming executive meeting. While the rest of the building dimmed, they spread out blueprints in the large DOS open office area. Poring over details, Megan highlighted ways to cut waste without sacrificing design. Christopher added suggestions to manage labor costs responsibly. The synergy surprised them both. A few times, Christopher caught Megan checking the clock, her expression tight. At 7:30 p.m., he nudged a folder toward her. "Go home. We've done enough for today." She looked torn. "We're close to finalizing this section." "Family first," he said, voice gentler than usual. "I'll polish it up here. You can review it fresh in the morning." A shadow of gratitude crossed her features. She packed her laptop, thanked him quietly, and headed out. Watching her leave, Christopher recalled the two bright faces he'd seen through that apartment window. He couldn't imagine the weight Megan carried, juggling a demanding job with the needs of her twin daughters. He turned back to the drafts, taking her pen and refining a line of measurements. The office was eerily silent, but for once, Christopher didn't feel alone. Working side by side, he and Megan had begun forging something unexpectedly meaningful. A project that transcended corporate ambition, one that might give him a chance to atone, if only a little, for the harm inflicted in the past. On Monday morning, the tension in Brown Enterprises' grand conference room felt nearly palpable. The sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows did nothing to soften the mood of the gathered executives. Christopher stood at the head of the polished wooden table, Megan at his left, and Thomas Reynolds on the opposite side, flanked by several directors wearing skeptical frowns. "All right," Christopher began, clearing his throat. "We're here to discuss the affordable housing initiative that Megan Carter is leading. I want to address any concerns regarding its feasibility and financial impact." Thomas's sharp gaze settled on Megan. "With all due respect, Ms. Carter, it's not that we doubt your skill, but our business model has thrived on high-end commercial developments. Why risk that success?" Megan took a moment before responding, her voice calm and measured. "We're not abandoning commercial ventures. We're diversifying. The design focuses on sustainability and community engagement, and while initial margins might look slimmer, there's long-term value, both in brand reputation and in tapping new market segments. Lower to middle-income housing is in demand, and if we do this right, we'll see steady returns." A low murmur spread among the directors. Christopher could sense both interest and hostility mingling in the room. He carefully slid a packet of financial projections across the table. "We've run the numbers. The cost might be higher in certain areas, but there are potential tax breaks and public funding we can pursue. Also, from a PR standpoint," Thomas cut in, "we can't run a business on good PR alone." Christopher's jaw tightened. He kept his voice even. "I'm aware, and that's why these projections demonstrate that over 5 to 7 years, the return on investment holds. This isn't charity, it's a legitimate venture." He glanced toward Megan, who pulled up a digital slideshow. Graphs and comparative data flashed on a large screen. She spoke with a steady confidence, detailing how efficient construction methods and strategic partnerships could offset costs. Several directors started flipping through the documents, exchanging guarded nods. Still, one director, a stern-faced man in his 60s, leaned back in his leather chair. "Seems like a big gamble, Brown. Our shareholders won't appreciate any stumbles." Christopher inhaled, steeling himself. "I understand the risks. But I'm prepared to personally guarantee part of the initial phase, if necessary. This project aligns with a growing market trend we can't ignore. A few eyebrows rose at Christopher's mention of personal investment. Even Thomas paused, briefly taken aback. The CFO glanced at the packet again, scanning the finer details. The tension built until Robert Chen, one of the more pragmatic board members, cleared his throat. Look, I'm not fully convinced, but I see some potential. If Christopher is willing to put personal capital on the line, that speaks volumes. Let's consider a smaller pilot phase, gather data, and then scale up. Megan nodded, carefully noting his suggestion. That's exactly our plan for Phase 1, 50 units in the pilot location, with the possibility to expand if it proves sustainable. Thomas's skepticism hadn't vanished, but he recognized the shift in the room. Several directors, swayed by Christopher's uncharacteristic willingness to compromise and Megan's thorough presentation, seemed ready to give the green light. As the discussion concluded, a formal vote was taken. The board approved the pilot project, albeit with conditions. Megan allowed herself a small smile, while Christopher watched the room with cautious relief. When the meeting ended, a swirl of conversation erupted among the executives. Thomas lingered. He approached Christopher with a tight expression. "You really believe in this?" he said, half accusation, half surprise. Christopher nodded. "I do, because it's worth believing in." Thomas studied him for a long moment before offering a non-committal grunt and walking away. Megan gathered her files, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She gave Christopher a nod of gratitude. He returned it with the faintest of smiles, grateful they'd weathered the first major hurdle. Out in the corridor, staff buzzed with whispers of Christopher's unusual pivot. For the first time, perhaps ever, he had fought for a cause beyond pure profit in a visible, charred public way. It left him both uneasy and strangely alive. His mind flicked to Megan's unwavering composure and the heartbreak she carried beneath her polished exterior. In that moment, he realized that battling the board was just the beginning. Deeper conflicts, emotional, ethical, and personal, still loomed ahead. But for now, the pilot project had a chance to stand on its own. And in that victory, Christopher felt the stirrings of hope that redemption might be more than a distant dream. A crisp morning sun shone over the western part of Chicago as Christopher Brown and Megan Carter drove toward the proposed location for their pilot housing project. Though they used separate cars, they pulled up alongside each other on a street where old brick buildings and fenced lots stretched into the distance. The bustle of downtown felt worlds away. Stepping onto the sidewalk, Christopher surveyed the surroundings. He wore a tailored suit jacket but had left the tie behind, attempting a more approachable look. Megan, dressed in dark jeans and a neat blazer, cradled a sheaf of papers under her arm. As they walked toward a vacant lot, she pointed out the boundaries. Chain-link fences bordered patches of overgrown grass. A few blocks away, modest homes stood in rows, some in need of repairs, some freshly painted, signs of a neighborhood in flux. "This is where we plan to break ground," Megan explained, leading Christopher over uneven pavement. "We'll start with 50 units, focusing on energy efficiency and shared green spaces." Christopher nodded, trying to picture the design she'd drafted. "It's smaller than I imagined," he said quietly, mentally running through budget spreadsheets. "Smaller, but full of potential," Megan replied. "This area has a community presence. People look out for each other, even if the resources are limited." As if on cue, an older woman approached them. Maria Rodriguez, age 58, had short salt-and-pepper hair and wore a worn floral print blouse. Her expression was a mixture of curiosity and guarded defiance. "You must be from that real estate company," she said, arms crossed. "They told us some big shot was visiting." Christopher introduced himself and extended a polite hand. "We're hoping to develop affordable housing here. Thought you might have questions." Maria studied him for a moment. "Questions? Sure. We've seen developers come in promising fancy projects, but they usually push folks out or disappear when the profit ain't big enough." Megan spoke before Christopher could respond. "We want to do this differently. I'm the lead architect, Megan Carter. We're listening to local input so we can design a place that supports the community, not uproots it." Maria's gaze flicked between them. "We'll see," she said, voice carrying the hard-earned skepticism of someone who's been let down before. She gestured toward a nearby building. "We hold monthly block meetings in that church basement. You want people on your side? Show up and answer our questions." Megan thanked her, and Maria walked off, casting one last contemplative look over her shoulder. Christopher exhaled. "Public relations might be trickier than I thought," he murmured. "They have every right to be cautious," Megan replied. "Developers in other neighborhoods have broken promises." They continued exploring, stepping onto the actual lot. Christopher noticed a tall figure leaning against a parked car nearby, an elderly man with a cane. As the two approached, he offered a faint smile. "Don't mind me, just watching the excitement," he said. His voice had a warmth that belied the deep lines on his face. Megan introduced them again, and the man revealed his name, Raymond Washington, 71 years old, a long-time resident. "I heard about your project," Raymond said. "Used to know a woman named Elizabeth Brown around these parts long ago. She worked at the hotel downtown." Christopher felt an electric jolt at the mention of his mother's name. "Elizabeth Brown was my mother," he said quietly. "She passed away years ago." Raymond's eyes softened. "She talked about her boy, so smart and determined. You must be him." For a moment, Christopher stood speechless. His mother had rarely spoken of her struggles, but apparently she'd shared her dreams with someone in this neighborhood. Megan shot him a sideways glance, sensing his unexpected emotion. Clearing his throat, Christopher finally managed, "She had big hopes for me. I'm trying to live up to them, I guess." Raymond gave a nod. "Well, if you're looking to do something good here, I'm rooting for you." Then he tilted his cane toward the vacant lot. "But it won't be easy. You'll face permits, unscrupulous competition, and more." Megan thanked him, and they made their way farther onto the lot, stepping through tall grass. She explained possible challenges: soil remediation, outdated zoning restrictions, city council negotiations. Christopher listened more intently than usual, some part of him moved by the faint memory of his mother's old neighborhood. Their conversation paused when Megan's phone buzzed. A photo of two little girls popped up, flashing the names Lily and Luna. Megan sighed. "Daycare is calling. I need to check in on them." Christopher's chest tightened slightly, recalling the moment he'd first seen those bright-eyed twins through her window. He nodded, stepping aside to give her privacy. As she spoke softly on the phone, Christopher stared at the lot with new determination. He would face any bureaucratic hurdle, any internal corporate battle, if it meant honoring both his mother's unrealized dreams and Megan's unwavering dedication. This wasn't just a business venture anymore. It was the first tangible step towards something far more meaningful, something that just might redeem him if he could stay the course. Early Sunday morning, Christopher slipped out of his penthouse and into the driver's seat of his black Mercedes. His usual routine involved a gym workout or leisurely breakfast alone, but today he had a different plan. He intended to orchestrate an accidental meeting with Megan Carter and her daughters. He knew from overhearing small talk among co-workers and from his own discreet observations that Megan often took Lily and Luna to a small neighborhood park on weekends. He felt a pinch of guilt about staging a chance encounter. Yet a stronger urge compelled him. He wanted to know more about Megan's life beyond the office, to see her daughters in a normal setting. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was a growing desire to connect. 15 minutes later, he parked near the park's entrance, scanning for familiar faces amid the families and joggers passing by. Within moments, he spotted Megan guiding two identical 6-year-olds toward the swings. They wore bright jackets and beamed at each other with that special twin energy. Christopher's heart panged with remorse at the memory of how he'd once watched them unseen. He donned a casual jacket, still far more expensive than anything around him, and strolled slowly into the park. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and the laughter of children filled the morning quiet. Megan's back was turned as she helped Luna adjust the straps of her helmet for a scooter ride. Lily tested her swing, pumping her small legs and giggling. Summoning nerve, Christopher approached. "Morning," he said lightly, as if just noticing them by happenstance. Megan spun around, surprise flashing in her green eyes. "Mr. Brown, Hi," she managed, clearly taken aback. "Christopher," he corrected gently. "It's the weekend." Lily hopped off the swing, bounding over with open curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked, her big green eyes fixated on this tall stranger. Megan glanced down, cheeks faintly coloring. "Lily, Luna, this is Christopher. He's a friend from work," she said, choosing her words carefully. Christopher crouched slightly, trying to appear less imposing. "Nice to meet you two. Your mum talks about how creative you are. Are you the famous artists who do all those drawings at home?" Lily grinned, nodding eagerly. Luna, more reserved, studied Christopher with a thoughtful stare. "Sometimes we paint with Mommy," Luna said quietly. "She shows us how to mix colors." The sight of them up close struck Christopher anew. They shared Megan's delicate features, but their faces brimmed with unguarded excitement that only children seemed able to sustain. He felt a flicker of regret again, recalling the accident that had robbed them of their father. Megan cleared her throat. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, not unkindly but clearly cautious. He feigned nonchalance, gesturing to his surroundings. "I've been exploring more of Chicago's parks lately. Needed a change from my usual routine." As Lily tugged on Megan's hand, asking for help climbing the monkey bars, Christopher seized the moment. "Could I give her a quick boost?" he offered. Megan hesitated, then allowed it. Lily squealed in delight as Christopher lifted her carefully onto the bars, making sure she had a solid grip. 10 minutes passed in a blur of small exchanges. Christopher pushed Lily on the swing while Megan held Luna's scooter. Both girls peppered him with childlike questions. Did he have a pet? He did not. Did he like ice cream? Certainly, chocolate was his favorite. Their innocence was disarming, and Christopher felt his usual composure soften. Eventually, Megan guided them to a shaded bench. Lily and Luna hungrily opened small snack pouches while Megan folded her arms, turning to Christopher with a half smile. "You're surprisingly good with kids," she observed. He shrugged, trying to ignore the warmth in his chest. "I had to grow up pretty quickly. Never got the chance to be around little ones. It's different." A moment of genuine fondness passed between them, until Luna asked, "Do you know our dad?" Her voice was quiet, but the question fell heavily. Megan froze, and Christopher's heart lurched. He struggled to find words. No, I didn't," he said softly, glancing at Megan for help. Megan placed a gentle hand on Luna's shoulder. "Not everyone knew your daddy, honey." She offered Christopher a quick, apologetic glance. Sensing the weight of the moment, Christopher cleared his throat. "Well, maybe we can—" He stopped, realizing he was about to tread into family territory he had no right claiming. After a slight pause, Megan stood. "I should probably get them home." Her smile was kind, but guarded. "It was Nice seeing you. Christopher's chest tightened. Likewise, he said, waving a gentle goodbye to the girls. He watched as they disappeared through the park's gate, uncertain whether he'd just forged a small bridge into Megan's life or constructed yet another barrier of secrets and half-truths. 2 days after their brief weekend encounter, Christopher found himself pacing his office late at night. The overhead lights hummed, casting stark reflections in the floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd spent the day juggling investor calls and internal meetings, but his mind kept wandering back to Megan and her daughters. The guilt over his clandestine discovery of their family situation gnawed at him. He had to be honest with Megan, at least partly. Keeping the truth entirely hidden felt unethical and was now an unbearable weight on his conscience. Around 8 o'clock, he noticed Megan was still at her desk, finalizing some design elements for the housing project. In a rare moment of resolve, he walked over. "Could we talk for a minute in private?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. She glanced up, surprised to see him there so late. "Sure," she replied. He motioned for her to follow him into a small meeting room down the hall. Once inside, Christopher closed the door and took a breath. "I've been reviewing some information," he began, choosing his words carefully. I know about your husband, Daniel, and the accident." Megan's expression tightened. "How did you—" she started, then pressed her lips together, tension radiating from her. "It's not exactly a secret, but I never mentioned it. I didn't see a reason to." Christopher swallowed, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "I only learned the details recently," he admitted. "And I realized Brown Enterprises was involved in that project where Daniel was lost. I just want you to know that if I'd known earlier, I would have handled things differently when you came on board." Her eyes flashed with a mix of hurt and defensiveness. "Handled things how? Offered pity? A handshake for my loss?" She exhaled sharply. "Daniel's death, your company's role, it's complicated, Christopher." He heard the anger behind her polite veneer. "I'm not trying to diminish anything," he said, voice trembling with a sincerity that felt foreign. "I feel responsible in some way, even though it was subcontractors who were blamed legally. But morally—" Megan's jaw clenched. "Morally, yes. It's on all of you who let a site become so unsafe. But I came here by choice. I wanted to see who was running these projects and if they'd changed. I'm here because I believe architecture can still do good, even after what happened to Daniel." A weighted silence followed. Christopher ran a hand over his face. He decided not to mention following her or seeing her daughters from outside that apartment window. That confession felt too raw, too likely to destroy any rapport they had. Instead, he focused on what he could reveal. "I can't erase the past," he said, "but I want to make things right going forward. I hope that this new housing project is a start." Megan's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions. Anger, sorrow, perhaps a hint of relief. "I appreciate the honesty," she managed, though her tone was guarded. "Just don't expect me to forgive everything. This is about more than me. It's about Lily and Luna never knowing their father." Christopher bowed his head, a pang of guilt stabbing deeper than any business defeat he'd ever experienced. "I understand," he whispered, "but if there's anything I can do—" She cut him off gently. "Focus on making this project genuinely helpful, not a PR stunt. That'll mean more to me than any personal apology." He nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I will. I promise." For a moment, they stood in a fragile standoff, each harboring secrets they hadn't fully unveiled. Then Megan exhaled. "Thank you for telling me," she said more softly, "but this doesn't change the fact that I'm here as a professional. Keep it that way, okay?" Christopher offered a faint, respectful nod. "Of course." With that, Megan turned and left the small meeting room, leaving Christopher alone among the silent chairs and overhead lights. He stared at the closed door, sensing that even this partial truth had created a tremor in their relationship. The tension might rupture everything or lead to a new understanding. He simply didn't know which. His phone buzzed, Sandra reminding him of an early meeting. But the typical corporate routine felt distant. He walked back to his office, mind swirling with thoughts of second chances, moral debts, and the quiet determination Megan carried. The partial confession weighed on him, but at least now they shared a glimpse of the truth. Maybe it was a step toward the kind of honesty he'd long avoided. A few nights after his confession, Christopher insisted on driving Megan home. The team had stayed late again, working on final revisions for the housing project's environmental report. Megan initially refused, citing the train schedule and her preference to keep professional boundaries, but Christopher gently persisted, saying it was too dark and cold to risk public transit alone. Tired and wanting to see her children, Megan relented. They left the office in his Mercedes, the city lights reflecting off tinted windows. Megan sat in the front passenger seat, posture stiff, her laptop bag hugged to her chest. Christopher eased into traffic, wanting to break the tension but unsure how. Finally, Megan cleared her throat. "Thank you for the ride," she said quietly, glancing at the neon-lit storefronts whizzing by. "Of course," Christopher replied. "I appreciate everything you've been doing for the project." She gave a small nod, then lapsed into silence. After a few blocks, Christopher ventured cautiously, "How are Lily and Luna?" A faint smile graced her lips. "They're fine. Though Lily's convinced she's the next Picasso, and Luna has taken an interest in my old drafting tools." "That's great," Christopher said, meaning it. He remembered the wide-eyed wonder in those twins' faces when he saw them at the park. They continued navigating through Chicago's streets until Megan directed him to her neighborhood, a working-class district far from the steel and glass towers of downtown. Christopher found a parking spot in front of her apartment building, the same place he'd once spied from his car. An uneasy sense of déjà vu filled him. When they stepped out, cold air bit at their cheeks. Megan led the way up the short flight of stairs. Her hand trembled slightly as she unlocked the door. Inside, the warmth of a small living room embraced them, walls decorated with children's art, shelves stacked with family photos, and a few scattered toys on the floor. Lily and Luna, roused from coloring at the coffee table, bounded over. "Mommy, you're home!" Lily exclaimed. Then she noticed Christopher. "Oh, hi, you came back!" Megan threw him an apologetic look. "They remember you from the park." Christopher crouched to greet the girls. "Hi, Lily, hi, Luna, good to see you again." Their chatter swirled around him in a burst of excitement. They asked if he'd help them pick crayons, or if he liked the cartoon they were watching. Megan tried to usher them toward bedtime routines, but they managed to drag Christopher into a brief conversation about the new building Mommy is making. "All right, enough questions," Megan eventually said, guiding them toward their bedroom. "Say goodnight." As they scampered away, Christopher felt an odd warmth in his chest, mixed with the weight of unspoken guilt. He rose, noticing the living room more clearly now, a modest couch, a small dining table, and a corner that served as Megan's mini-office. The place felt lived in and real, the polar opposite of his sterile penthouse. Megan returned after a few minutes, looking uneasy. "They're excited, but they need to sleep. Thanks for indulging them." Christopher attempted a gentle smile. "I don't mind." A flicker of vulnerability crossed her features. "Listen, about the other night, I'm still sorting out how I feel about your confession. It helps that you acknowledge Daniel's death, but it doesn't wipe the slate clean." He nodded, hands slipping into his coat pockets. I understand. I won't push. I just want to do right by you and the girls, in whatever way I can." For a moment, Megan seemed on the verge of tears. She drew in a breath. "Your support with the housing project, making it safe, genuinely beneficial, is a start. That's all I can handle right now." He accepted that quietly. Then his gaze drifted to a family photo on the mantel. Megan, Daniel, and the twins as infants. The pang of sorrow that shot through him was almost tangible, so many moments stolen by a single, preventable accident. A sudden beep from Megan's phone broke the tension. She sighed. "Right, tomorrow's meeting. I need to finalize a few notes. Then I'll leave you to it," Christopher said softly, taking a step toward the door. "Thanks for letting me say hello to the girls." She nodded, walking him out. Their eyes met briefly on the threshold, a fragile truce passing between them. Neither smiled, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement that they were inching toward a new understanding, built on shaky ground, yes, but still offering a glimpse of hope. "Drive safe," Megan added as he descended the stairs. Christopher glanced back, offering a light wave before heading to his car. Though many secrets still weighed on them, tonight had laid another small brick in the uncertain foundation of trust they were trying, in their own halting way, to construct. The following Friday, Megan surprised Christopher by extending an invitation he never expected. A simple home-cooked dinner with her and the twins. She admitted it was partly because the girls wouldn't stop asking about Mommy's friend who helped with crayons, but there was also a note of guarded sincerity in her voice. Christopher arrived at 6, carrying a small bouquet of lilies and a box of colored pencils for the girls. Nervousness buzzed under his polished exterior. Formal dinners in corporate penthouses were familiar, but a cozy meal in Megan's modest apartment felt oddly momentous. He knocked lightly, and the door swung open to reveal Lily and Luna, grinning from ear to ear. Megan stood just behind them, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, her hair loosely pulled back. "Hi," she said, stepping aside so he could enter. The warm smells of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filled the small space. "Thank you for inviting me," Christopher murmured, handing her the flowers. Megan blinked in surprise, a slight smile touching her lips as she fetched a vase from the kitchen. The girls proudly showed him the colored pencils, giggling about their plans to draw the entire city skyline. Christopher followed their chatter into the living room, where the dining table had been pushed to the side to make space for a big sheet of butcher paper on the floor, a makeshift art station. "Mommy's letting us draw before dinner," Lily announced, eyes shining. "Usually we have to wait." "It's a special night," Megan explained, "and we won't be too messy, right?" She cast them a playful warning glance. Soon, Christopher found himself kneeling on the floor, helping Luna sketch tall buildings with rooftop gardens, an idea she'd gleaned from Megan's project designs. Lily doodled flowers and insisted that each building needed colorful murals. "You like tall buildings?" Christopher asked them, curious. "And they're cool," Luna said quietly, "but Mommy's buildings have plants on them so we can breathe better," Lily piped up, "and they're not scary towers. People can live there and play." Christopher's heart twisted at the irony. He'd spent years building scary towers, impersonal monuments to wealth. These two little girls, bounding with creativity, reminded him architecture could be about community and joy. When Megan called them to the table, Christopher helped place dishes and utensils. The table was small, seating 4 comfortably, and the meal was simple: roasted chicken, potatoes, and steamed vegetables. Yet the atmosphere crackled with a warmth he found himself savoring. Conversation flowed in starts and stops, mostly anchored by the girls. They asked Christopher if he liked music. He admitted to enjoying jazz, what he ate for breakfast, oatmeal and coffee, and whether he had any pets. Sadly, no. In a rare moment of quiet, Megan glanced across the table. How was your week? I know we had the big investor call. Christopher nodded, noting how she deftly balanced motherly tasks, cutting Luna's food, refilling Lily's cup, while maintaining a calm conversation. It went surprisingly well, he replied. They've approved partial funding for the pilot project. We still have to present more data, but it's a good step. Megan's eyes shone with genuine relief. That's wonderful. Once we finalize the building permits, we can start on-site preparations. He nodded, feeling the pull of gratitude and respect for this woman who juggled so much. Then Lily's small voice cut in, Mr. Christopher, do you know our daddy? Again, the question. Christopher's chest tightened. He saw Megan's face grow tense. He placed his fork down gently. I didn't, sweetie, he said, quietly meeting Lily's gaze. But I'm sure he was a very special person. The room seemed to hold its breath. Lily frowned a bit. He was an architect, like Mommy. Christopher swallowed. Yes, I know. Luna, who had been listening silently, suddenly slid off her chair, rummaging through a small box of drawings in the corner. She returned, holding up a crayon sketch of what looked like 4 stick figures, a woman, 2 little girls, and a tall man. An empty space hovered near them. This was me trying to draw him, Luna whispered, but I don't remember him good. The child's candor nearly undid Christopher. He felt a sting behind his eyes. Megan cleared her throat, her own voice unsteady. All right, sweethearts, let's finish dinner. We'll talk about Daddy later, okay? She guided the girls back to their seats, both looking a bit forlorn. Christopher wondered if he should excuse himself, afraid his presence reopened wounds. But Megan didn't send him away. Instead, she offered him a subtle nod of reassurance, as if saying, it's okay to stay. They finished the meal in a quieter, more thoughtful mood. Later, when the girls wandered to the living room to watch a short cartoon, Megan and Christopher tidied up in silence. The closeness of the small kitchen made him acutely aware of her presence. Thank you for coming, she said softly, handing him a dish to dry. It means a lot to them. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I should be thanking you, Megan, he replied. I haven't had a dinner like this in maybe ever. Their eyes met, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them. Despite the undercurrent of sadness, the evening held a fragile sweetness. It was as if they were all rewriting the definition of family, one small moment at a time. And for Christopher, who once thrived only on steel and glass, this simple gathering felt like the most meaningful foundation he'd ever encountered. The boardroom was hushed as Christopher Brown took his seat at the head of the long table, his expression set in grim determination. Across from him sat Thomas Reynolds, arms folded, projecting an aura of stubborn resistance. Around them, various board members had gathered for an unscheduled meeting, one Thomas had called behind Christopher's back. Rumors of financial instability in the pilot housing project had been circulating for days, and now the tension was at a breaking point. Megan Carter arrived moments later, quietly taking a seat beside Christopher. She'd just come from inspecting a critical design element with Michael Johnson, her loyal ally on the architectural team. The hush in the room deepened as she placed her files in front of her, sensing an atmosphere charged with suspicion. Thomas cleared his throat. Thank you all for attending on such short notice, he began, focusing on Christopher. We have new data suggesting that the project's costs are spiraling out of control. If we keep sinking resources into this affordable housing venture, we risk undermining other profitable developments. Christopher pressed his palms on the table, trying to control his frustration. We accounted for initial overruns, he replied evenly. Yes, we've hit snags, environmental reviews, negotiations with local authorities, but we planned for these contingencies. The latest figures don't indicate a crisis. Before Christopher could continue, a middle-aged board member named Greg tapped a folder. We've received an anonymous tip about irregularities in the project's supply chain, allegations of inflated invoices and missing documentation. Thomas thought it necessary to convene a meeting to address it. Megan's eyes flashed with dismay. Missing documentation. I handle most of the design and schedule elements personally. I haven't come across anything that suggests corruption or fraud. Thomas cast her a cool glance. Then perhaps you aren't looking closely enough. The anonymous complaint indicated that certain suppliers are overcharging, and we're hemorrhaging funds in the process. Christopher's gut twisted. He recalled the day he had effectively challenged Thomas in front of the board, pushing for the project despite opposition. Could Thomas be orchestrating a sabotage campaign? The idea seemed extreme, yet the man's ambition was no secret. Leaning forward, Christopher maintained calm. If there are suspicious discrepancies, I'm more than willing to investigate thoroughly. But I haven't seen any proof yet, and I won't stand for rumors that undermine our team's integrity. Thomas slid a stack of papers across the table. Then you can start with these. Check the supplier contracts for roofing materials and energy-efficient insulation. Megan flipped through the pages, her brow creasing. She recognized some figures, but others looked doctored or taken out of context. She suspected foul play, yet she had no solid evidence, only her instinct that these documents were twisted. A heated discussion erupted. Some directors insisted that the pilot project be paused until a full audit could be completed. Others, still hopeful for the long-term gains Christopher had promised, argued they should continue construction to avoid losing momentum. Eventually, Christopher stood, voice steeled by indignation. We will comply with an audit if that's what you need to feel secure. But pausing construction hurts not only our timeline, but also the neighborhood we've promised to uplift. I don't intend to break ground on half-finished dreams. Thomas's lips thinned. Fine, proceed at your own risk. But if our investigations confirm wrongdoing, the board will have grounds to terminate the project and potentially re-evaluate your position as CEO. A chill swept through the room. Even Megan felt the weight of that warning. If sabotage was indeed underway, it could not only doom the project, but also topple Christopher's leadership. The meeting ended with no definitive resolution, just the agreement that an internal audit would begin immediately. As the board members filed out, Megan turned to Christopher, her voice quiet. Someone's trying to sabotage this, and it feels personal. Christopher nodded grimly. Thomas won't stop until he wins or is proven wrong. In the meantime, we need to uncover who's behind these false allegations and why. Outside, the sky seemed to darken as storm clouds crept over Chicago's skyline. A metaphorical tempest had begun, and Christopher, Megan, and their allies would need to stand firm if they had any hope of weathering it. Late that evening, the office was nearly deserted when Megan found Sandra Miller, Christopher's long-standing executive assistant, rummaging through a file cabinet in the corridor. Sandra seemed flustered, her usually composed demeanor shaken. "Sandra, are you all right?" Megan asked, her tone cautious. Sandra glanced over her shoulder, closing the cabinet softly. She gave a strained smile. I'm just looking for some old supply chain records. I suspect they might help disprove the allegations about overcharging." She inhaled deeply, letting her gaze rest on Megan. "Look, I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how." Megan's stomach clenched. "Is it about Thomas and the sabotage?" Sandra shook her head. "No, it's about Christopher. And you. I fear I've said something I shouldn't have." A sense of dread washed over Megan. "What do you mean?" Sandra nervously adjusted her glasses. "Weeks ago, I overheard Christopher mention following you one evening. He said he'd driven to your apartment, watched from outside. He felt terrible about it, but was compelled by curiosity. I accidentally let that slip during an argument with Thomas, and he's been using it as leverage." Megan's pulse roared in her ears. "He followed me." Her voice was low, shaky with both shock and anger. Sandra's eyes were full of remorse. "He was torn up about it afterward. Megan, I truly believe it wasn't malicious, but Thomas found out, and he threatened to expose Christopher's unethical behavior if he didn't step aside from the project." Christopher refused. Megan could hardly breathe. She recalled how Christopher had partially confessed knowing about her family, but never mentioned tailing her. The memory of him showing up at her park, how it seemed too coincidental, now snapped into focus. "I appreciate your honesty, Sandra," she whispered, "but I need a moment." Leaving Sandra looking guilty, Megan headed straight for Christopher's office. She found him at his desk, lost in thought over the new data for the project. "We need to talk now," she said, voice trembling. He stood, eyes widening at her rigid posture. "Megan, what? You followed me," she hissed, stepping inside and closing the door hard. "You spied on my apartment, on my daughters. Sandra told me everything." Christopher's face paled. "I was going to tell you the whole truth," he began, but his words fell flat. Rage and betrayal flared in Megan's eyes. "You had no right. Do you realize how violated I feel? I kept my personal life separate for a reason, but you—" She paused, voice cracking. "Was that how you learned about Lily and Luna? By peering through my windows?" Christopher's shoulders slumped. "Megan, I'm so sorry. It was impulsive, and I've regretted it every day since." She blinked back tears. "It's not just impulsive. It's invasive. You used what you saw to manipulate your way closer, didn't you?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, it wasn't like that. At first, I was curious. Then I realized your husband had died on our project, and it crushed me. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how to admit what I'd done." Megan let out a trembling exhale. "You made me believe you'd only recently discovered who I was. But you've known since that night." Christopher stepped around his desk, hands extended in supplication. "Everything else I've done, pushing for the project, supporting you, trying to connect with the girls, was genuine. But I know this was a breach of trust." Tears stung Megan's eyes. Though she refused to let them fall, she stared at him, recalling every conversation, every dinner he'd shared with her family. "I came here to see if Brown Enterprises could be different, to see if you were different, and for a while I thought maybe you were." Her voice cracked. "But now, I don't know if I can believe anything." Christopher's voice shook with desperation. "Please, let me make it right. I never meant to manipulate you, I swear." She stepped back, drawing in a ragged breath. "I need time. Don't speak to me outside of work. And if you think I can ignore this—" "I can't." Turning on her heel, she left his office, tears finally escaping down her cheeks. Behind her, Christopher stood in anguished silence. The truth had been laid bare, and any fragile bond they'd built was on the brink of collapse. The days that followed were marked by a heavy silence between Christopher and Megan. Though they occupied the same corporate spaces, they hardly spoke except for essential project matters. Megan avoided meeting his gaze, her posture stiff whenever they crossed paths. Christopher felt the repercussions of his choices in every aspect of his life. His penthouse, once a symbol of achievement, now felt oppressive. Each night, he found himself haunted by the image of Megan's tearful eyes. He replayed the confrontation in his mind, wishing he had been honest from the start. At the office, even the staff noticed the shift. Michael Johnson, perplexed by the sudden chill, asked Megan if something had happened. She deflected his concern, stating only that she was focusing on deadlines. Sandra, racked with guilt for her accidental confession, tried to offer small gestures of support, but Megan remained aloof, burying herself in drafting new design elements and triple-checking budgets for any sabotage from Thomas's camp. Meanwhile, Christopher tried to salvage the project amid the swirling accusations of financial impropriety. The internal audit team had started combing through documents. Periodically, suspicious anomalies appeared, missing receipts, changed invoice numbers, feeding the narrative that the venture was draining company resources. Though Christopher suspected Thomas was behind it, he lacked proof. Late one evening, Christopher stood by the large windows in his office, overlooking the city. Storm clouds gathered again, reflecting his turmoil. In his hand, he clutched a letter he had written to Megan, an apology, a plea, a confession of every regret. He doubted he had the right to ask her forgiveness. Still, he wanted her to know how deeply he cared for her, Lily, and Luna. Yet each time he considered leaving it on her desk, fear rooted him in place. He had already hurt her by invading her privacy and concealing the truth. Another impulsive act might push her away for good. So he tucked the letter into a drawer, telling himself to wait. Over in her modest apartment, Megan faced her own internal battle. The memory of Christopher gazing at her children, speaking kindly to them, contrasted with the knowledge that he had once watched them like a stranger peering through the glass. She hated how part of her still longed for the man who had shown genuine devotion to her work, who had helped them fund Lily's art supplies and introduced Luna to the wonders of architecture. She curled up on the sofa after tucking the twins into bed, her laptop open to the project files. The new numbers from the audit weighed heavily, but she forced herself to focus. If she abandoned the project now, the community would suffer. And though her anger at Christopher was raw, the housing initiative represented Daniel's legacy as much as anything else. Daniel had always dreamed of architecture that served people, not just corporate profit. Megan's phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Just checking in, everything okay? She thought of ignoring it, but guilt pressed her. I'm fine. Let's keep the project on track, she typed back. She couldn't sabotage her own work simply because her relationship with Christopher was in tatters. At that moment, Lily shuffled out of her bedroom, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mommy, can't sleep," she murmured. "You look sad." Megan set aside the laptop. "I'm just tired, sweetie. Come here." Lily nestled against her side. "Is Mr. Christopher still coming for dinner tomorrow?" Lily asked, yawning. Megan's heart clenched. She had forgotten the girls had invited him again before the confrontation. "He's busy," Megan replied gently, running her fingers through Lily's hair. "He might not come." Lily accepted the answer with a child's resilience, drifting back to bed soon after. But Megan lay awake long after, staring at the darkness and wondering if she could ever trust Christopher again. Across town, in his lonely penthouse, Christopher clicked off the final office light and sat in silence. The city below buzzed with life, but he felt none of its energy. For all his wealth, he faced an emptiness he couldn't buy his way out of. The project was in jeopardy, and the person he'd come to care for seemed further away than ever. He leaned back, closing his eyes. If he wanted redemption, both for his past negligence and his recent deceit, he had to earn it. Simply hoping Megan would forgive him was no plan at all. He would need to show he'd changed through selfless action and unwavering commitment to the vision they once shared. In the week following their confrontation, Megan and Christopher maintained a strictly professional relationship. Their interactions occurred mostly in formal project meetings or during conference calls with the city planning department. Though Megan's tone remained clipped, Christopher made a conscious effort to respect her boundaries. He never lingered at her desk or tried to invite her to personal chats. Despite the lingering tension, the housing project advanced, construction permits were finally approved, thanks to Megan's tireless revisions and Christopher's insistence on pushing the city council to expedite. The day the approval documents arrived, a subdued sort of cheer rippled through the architectural team. Michael Johnson was the first to approach Megan with congratulations. "We're cleared to break ground, Megan. This is huge," he said, giving her a friendly pat on the shoulder. She allowed herself a small smile. "It is," she agreed. "We should get a timeline in place for the contractors next week." Standing at a distance, Christopher watched. His chest filled with gratitude for Megan's dedication. Even though their personal connection was fractured, she hadn't abandoned the project. He admired her resolve now more than ever. The next day, Robert Chen from the board stopped by unannounced. He found Megan and Christopher hunched over blueprint adjustments in the collaborative workspace. Robert nodded in approval. "We're hearing good things about your progress," he said. "Thomas is still pressing the audit, but so far, no conclusive wrongdoing has been found." Christopher didn't hide his relief. "We have nothing to hide," he stated. "I'm confident the final audit report will clear us of any sabotage claims." Robert gave a measured nod. "I hope so. Investors are getting anxious, but if you can present tangible progress soon, that should keep them on board." "Keep me posted." With that, he left, and Christopher dared a glance at Megan. She kept her focus on the blueprints, but her voice softened a fraction. "At least the audit hasn't uncovered anything damning yet," she said. Tracing a measurement with her pencil, Christopher exhaled. "I appreciate your calm in all of this. Thomas has only made the environment more hostile. If it weren't for you, the board might have pulled the plug weeks ago." Megan shrugged. "The project is bigger than us. I'm not giving up on it." He read the subtext. "I might have given up on you, but not on this." The realization stung, yet he couldn't blame her. She was here for a cause, not a personal relationship. Over the following days, they settled into an uneasy rhythm of collaboration. Megan approved design elements, Christopher secured additional funding, and each recognized the other's competence, even if their personal bond lay in ruins. Sandra, witnessing the tension, steered clear of personal questions, focusing on administrative tasks with her usual efficiency. One afternoon, Megan found a note on her desk. "Meeting at the site tomorrow. Inspection for final pre-construction steps. Could you come, Christopher?" She read it twice, debating her options. Finally, she scribbled a terse, "Yes, I'll be there." Early the next morning, they arrived at the lot from opposite directions. A few potential contractors milled about with measuring equipment, and city officials checked the property lines. Christopher greeted them warmly, but kept a respectful distance from Megan. Walking the perimeter, Megan felt the ground crunch beneath her shoes. She imagined families strolling in shared courtyards, children running across safe play areas. The vision fueled her determination. Her heart clenched, remembering how Daniel had once spoken of turning vacant urban lots into vibrant living spaces. Christopher approached cautiously, hands in his pockets. He gestured toward a flagged corner of the land. "They say we might need extra stabilization here," he said quietly. "We should factor that into the budget." She nodded, kneeling to examine the soil. "I'll make adjustments in the structural plan." Then, surprising herself, she added, "Thanks for noticing." He managed a small, grateful smile. For a flicker of a moment, they seemed like partners again, bound by a shared dream rather than torn by secrets. By day's end, they'd settled on a course of action with the contractors. As the crew dispersed, Megan lingered, gazing at the empty lot. Christopher hovered near, bracing for her to walk away. But instead she turned, voice subdued. "I want this place to be a home for people who've never had one. That's why I keep pushing." He met her eyes. "I know. And I promise you, I'll keep fighting alongside you until it's done." She nodded, neither smiling nor scowling, but the tension in her shoulders eased. Their trust was still fractured, yet the housing project stood as a tentative bridge between them. Step by step, they were learning to coexist for the sake of something greater, and maybe, just maybe, that slow rebuilding offered a glimmer of hope for something more. A crisp autumn morning dawned on the day of the official groundbreaking ceremony. Rows of folding chairs had been set up near the lot's entrance. Colorful balloons and banners reading "New Beginnings" fluttered in the breeze, lending a festive feel to what had once been a barren patch of land. Despite the tension of recent weeks, there was a buzz of optimism in the air. Megan arrived first, her heart pounding with anticipation. She guided Lily and Luna by each hand. The girls wore matching sweaters and wide smiles. The ceremony was open to the community, and already local families mingled around, curious to see what this project promised. Then Christopher stepped out of his Mercedes, dressed more simply than usual, a fitted blazer and no tie. Sandra followed close behind, organizing a list of speakers for the event. Spotting Megan, Christopher offered a polite nod. She acknowledged him in return, though her expression remained carefully composed. City officials had set up a small stage with a microphone. Robert Chen, representing the board, conversed with potential investors on one side, while a few local leaders, including Maria Rodriguez, gathered on the other. Michael Johnson stood near the stage, ready to give an overview of the project's architectural goals. At exactly 10 o'clock, the ceremony began. A local pastor gave a brief blessing, talking about how this initiative might uplift the neighborhood. Then Maria stepped forward, her graying hair pulled back, speaking as a community representative. She welcomed everyone and expressed cautious optimism. "We've seen big promises before, but this time we're hoping for a real partnership. Let's make sure this becomes a place people can truly call home." Megan was next. She climbed the stage with measured steps, Lily and Luna watching proudly from the front row. In a steady voice, she shared the project's vision: affordable units, green courtyards, and spaces for families to grow. She spoke of architecture not just as buildings, but as frameworks for community life. As she spoke, she glanced at Christopher. Though she didn't smile, her eyes shone with quiet determination. Afterward, Christopher took the microphone, feeling the weight of many scrutinizing gazes. He cleared his throat and began, "For years, Brown Enterprises has focused on commercial development, but today we stand on a new path, one where profitability and social responsibility can coexist." He paused, letting the wind carry a moment of reflection. "I grew up in a part of Chicago that lacked safe, dignified housing. My mother worked multiple jobs, but she always dreamed of something better. This project is a step toward honoring that dream. We have a long road ahead, and I appreciate the faith many of you have placed in us. Thank you." Polite applause rippled through the small crowd. Thomas Reynolds, standing near the back, clapped half-heartedly, his expression unreadable. Still, he maintained a public front of support. Next came the ceremonial moment. Christopher and Megan each took a shovel, planting it into the soft ground, while officials and local leaders joined them. Cameras clicked, capturing the symbolic start. Lily and Luna squealed, rushing forward to watch their mother. The crowd parted, allowing the girls to peek at the newly turned earth. Megan lifted her shovel with a look of triumph, maybe more subdued than pure joy, but triumphant nonetheless. Christopher caught a fleeting glimpse of tears in her eyes before she blinked them away. A flurry of handshakes and congratulations followed. Reporters took photos, city officials spoke with local residents, and children ran around excitedly. In the midst of the excitement, Christopher and Megan found themselves side by side, awkwardly out of the public eye for a moment. "You did great up there," Christopher said softly, keeping his gaze on the bustling crowd. She nodded, glancing at him briefly. "So, did your story about your mother?" It was moving. A flicker of warmth passed between them, overshadowed by the knowledge of unresolved conflict. Yet the ceremony had bound them again, in a cause bigger than their personal strife. Nearby, Lily tugged on Megan's hand. "Mummy, can we show Mr. Christopher our drawings?" Megan hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, honey." The girls held up small sketches they'd made of the new buildings. Christopher knelt to admire them, praising their creativity. In that moment, Megan watched the three of them, her two daughters and the man who had broken her trust, yet who was also fighting to redeem himself. As the crowd began to thin, Christopher offered a quiet farewell. "Thank you for letting me be part of this day," he murmured. "I know it can't erase everything, but I'm grateful." Megan gave him a slow nod. "The real work starts now," she said, voice steady. She turned her attention to Lily and Luna, ushering them toward the car. Christopher stood alone amid the folding chairs and fluttering banners. He breathed in the crisp air, feeling both hopeful and uncertain. The pilot housing had officially begun, an emblem of possible redemption for him, for Megan, and for a neighborhood seeking new beginnings. Yet he knew the biggest storms were not necessarily behind them. Sometimes the hardest part came after the shovel hit the ground. 2 weeks had passed since the groundbreaking ceremony, and progress on the new housing project steadily continued. Workers had begun clearing debris and stabilizing the ground. Although the tension between Megan Carter and Christopher Brown had softened somewhat, they still kept their conversations professional. Their interactions revolved strictly around budgets, supplier negotiations, and timelines, leaving little space for personal connection. Late one afternoon, Megan hovered by Christopher's office door. Though she was still wary after learning he had followed her all those weeks ago, an unexpected development made her swallow her lingering reservations. She rapped softly on the open door, and Christopher glanced up, looking genuinely surprised to see her there. "Megan, come in," he said, shifting some paperwork aside. His tone held warmth, albeit tempered by uncertainty. She inhaled, reminding herself why she was doing this. "Lily and Luna's 7th birthday is next weekend," she began, eyes on the floor. They've been asking if you would come." Christopher set his pen down, struggling to maintain composure. "They've invited me?" he asked, hardly believing it. Megan nodded, her voice soft. "Yes. Despite everything that's happened, they keep bringing up the times you helped them with art projects or showed them the blueprint models. They said a party wouldn't feel right without you." He took a measured breath, heart pounding. "I'm honored, but are you comfortable with me being there?" Her gaze lifted, revealing a mix of uncertainty and sincerity. "I wouldn't extend the invitation if I didn't believe it would make them happy," she said plainly. Then she hesitated. "But I need to set some ground rules. I don't want any discussion about the project that day, no talk of budgets or construction issues. Just be there for the girls." Christopher nodded with a small, grateful smile. "Absolutely. I understand." A swirl of emotion passed between them. Relief on his part, a cautious acceptance on hers. For the first time in weeks, Megan's posture softened, hinting that maybe, just maybe, forgiveness wasn't entirely out of reach. The following days were a whirlwind of planning for Megan. Between finalizing structural details for the pilot complex and organizing a low-key birthday celebration for 2 energetic 7-year-olds, she barely had time to think. When Lily and Luna excitedly told their teacher that Mr. Christopher was coming to their party, Megan felt a flicker of mixed emotions, pride in their enthusiasm, and an ever-present pang of unresolved tension in her heart. Meanwhile, Christopher found himself wandering into a toy store for the first time in years. He felt almost foolish amid bright shelves of plush animals and art sets, but his determination to choose perfect gifts for Lily and Luna overrode any discomfort. He selected a pair of children's architecture kits, complete with small building blocks and simple design instructions, hoping to ignite their creative spark even further. He also picked out 2 sets of watercolors, remembering how they loved to paint. During the same trip, he paused near a display of children's books about coping with loss. He thought of how Lily and Luna had so many questions about their father, but he hesitated, unsure if that would be too personal, too painful. Eventually, he set the book aside. Perhaps that topic was best left to Megan's judgment. On the Thursday before the party, Megan caught Christopher in the corridor after a brief meeting with city officials. She handed him a small card with her address and a handwritten note about the birthday's date and time. "We're keeping it simple," she explained. "Some of their school friends will come, plus a few neighbors. Don't feel obliged to stay long." Christopher tucked the card carefully into his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll make sure to respect your space." She offered a fleeting nod, then turned to leave, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. Once again, he sensed the fragile balance they were maintaining, a professional partnership that had begun to thaw, if only a little, under the warmth of children's innocent faith. Back in his office, Christopher gazed at the card's handwritten address. Memories of the first time he'd driven there, hiding in the shadows, letting his own fear and curiosity push him toward an unforgivable breach of trust, flooded back. But now, things felt different. He was being invited in, openly, to celebrate a milestone that held genuine significance in Megan's life. He breathed a cautious sigh of relief. He knew redemption wouldn't come from a single moment, especially not a birthday party. But it was a start. A small door cracked open, offering him another chance to show that his intentions, at last, were honest and kind. Saturday dawned crisp and bright, the clear Chicago sky hinting at early spring. Megan's small apartment bustled with balloons, streamers, and the laughter of excited children. The twins, Lily and Luna, had spent half the morning squealing over each new decoration, especially the rainbow banner that read, "Happy 7th Birthday," in cheerful letters. Around midday, friends from the neighborhood trickled in. A few classmates arrived, parents in tow, bringing cupcakes and small wrapped gifts. The living room, already cozy, quickly filled with chatter. Megan wore a simple lavender sweater and jeans, hair pinned back to keep it out of her face. Despite the swirl of activity, she felt a thread of nervous anticipation tugging at her. Christopher was due to arrive any minute. The doorbell rang. Lily dashed to answer, nearly tripping over a stray balloon. She flung the door open, revealing Christopher, who stood holding 2 neatly wrapped packages and a bouquet of small flowers. He offered a warm smile, greeting Lily with a gentle, "Happy birthday, kiddo." Lily's eyes shone as she ushered him inside. "Mommy, Mr. Christopher's here," she announced, excitement radiating. Luna appeared at her sister's side, her reserved face lighting up at the sight of the familiar guest. Christopher entered, carefully navigating the cluster of excited children. Megan approached, meeting his gaze with measured calm. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, accepting the flowers he handed her. They were a mix of bright daisies and lilies. She offered a half smile. "The girls will love these." He nodded, heart pounding with relief that she didn't recoil at his presence. "I'm glad to be here. Thank you for letting me join in." Before they could say more, the twins tugged at Christopher's sleeves, guiding him toward the small dining table covered in colorful wrapping paper. They proudly displayed the store-bought cake, pink frosting for Lily's side, purple for Luna's, and insisted Christopher see the candles shaped like little architectural tools. Megan had found them online, a whimsical nod to both Daniel's and her own careers in architecture, and now a reminder of the spark growing in Lily and Luna. Children raced around, squealing with delight. Some were painting on a large roll of butcher paper spread across the floor. Others chased balloons. Meanwhile, a few parents congregated near the kitchen, nibbling on snacks while discussing neighborhood schools. Christopher navigated each group politely, fielding curious questions about his role at Brown Enterprises. He noticed some of Megan's neighbors eyeing him with careful curiosity, likely aware of her widowhood and how unexpected it might be to have another adult presence around. Yet everyone remained cordial, even friendly. When it came time to light the candles, Lily and Luna scrambled onto chairs. Megan carried out the cake, beaming at her daughters. Christopher hovered at the edge of the gathering, close enough to witness the spark in the twins' eyes as they prepared to blow out their birthday candles. The entire room sang happy birthday, voices overlapping in a cheerful cacophony. Lily and Luna squeezed their eyes shut, making silent wishes. Together, they puffed out the candles to raucous applause. After cake was served and sugar-induced energy filled the room, gifts were opened. Christopher stepped forward last, offering each twin a brightly wrapped package. Lily tore hers open first, gasping at the child-friendly architecture kit inside, a set of colorful interlocking pieces for building miniature houses and towers. Luna followed suit, finding her kit and sets of watercolor paints. Their excited giggles filled the room as they began discussing what they might build and paint. One of Lily's friends tugged Christopher's sleeve. "Are you an architect too?" she asked, wide-eyed. He crouched down to meet her gaze. "Not exactly," he replied, "but I work on big building projects, and I love what Miss Megan designs." Megan, overhearing, felt a rush of warmth despite her guarded heart. She recalled Daniel teaching their daughters how to build block towers when they were toddlers. For a fleeting instant, she imagined how different life might have been if Daniel were here. Yet seeing Christopher sit patiently, guiding Luna's small hands as she flipped through the pages of an instruction booklet, Megan felt a hint of solace. As the afternoon wore on, more guests came and went. The kids gradually wound down, content to color quietly. Megan ducked into the kitchen to brew coffee for the remaining adults. Christopher followed, offering to help gather paper plates and cups. For a moment, the two of them found themselves alone. She pressed the button on the coffee machine, keeping her voice low. "You're good with them," she said, nodding toward the living room. "They really like you." Christopher exhaled, sensing the weight of her words. "They're great kids. I just hope—" He paused, choosing his phrase carefully. "I hope my being here doesn't make things harder for you." Megan glanced at him, her expression conflicted. "Maybe a bit," she admitted, "but it also makes them happy, so thank you." They held each other's gaze in a moment of profound understanding. The trust between them was fragile but growing, nurtured by the unquenchable hope of two little girls celebrating their 7th birthday. And for Christopher, the realization crystallized. Building genuine bonds, like constructing a home, took time, patience, and a willingness to admit past mistakes. Several days later, Megan found herself standing outside Christopher's office door once again. This time, her expression was gentler than before. As he looked up from his desk, she offered a tentative smile. "Got a minute?" He gestured for her to come in. "Of course," he said, rising from his chair with subdued eagerness. She closed the door, inhaling. "There are 2 things I want to do," she began, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "First, I'd like you to visit Daniel's grave with me and the girls. They've been asking more and more about their dad, and I think it's time to acknowledge that you're part of our lives now, in some way." Christopher's eyes widened. "I'd be honored," he replied softly, feeling both touched and anxious. "But are you sure?" Megan gave a small, sad smile. "I'm sure. It's something the girls need. I do too. Daniel will always be their father, and I want them to know it's okay to care about you as well." Christopher's chest clenched with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He nodded, voice hushed. "I'll go, whenever you're ready." Thank you, Megan whispered, exhaling slowly. Second, Lily and Luna have never been to Navy Pier. I promised them a fun day once we got this project off the ground. She paused, scanning Christopher's face. Would you like to join us? A flicker of disbelief sparked in his eyes. Yes, I mean, absolutely, he said, struggling to keep his composure. Great, she replied, a flash of relief crossing her features. We can do the cemetery in the morning, Navy Pier in the afternoon. I figure it'll be emotional for the girls, so a fun outing afterward might soften that weight. Christopher agreed, and they settled on Saturday for these dual visits. The rest of the week passed in a blur of site inspections, contractor check-ins, and the occasional pang of nerves whenever Christopher imagined visiting Daniel's grave. When Saturday arrived, the sky held a gentle overcast that threatened light rain. Megan, Christopher, Lily, and Luna met at the cemetery entrance. The twins clung to Megan's hands, each holding a small bouquet of daisies they had picked out themselves. Christopher carried a quiet solemnity, unsure how to provide comfort in this most delicate moment. They walked in silence to Daniel Carter's headstone, a simple granite marker with a short inscription. Flowers from previous visits lay wilted around its base. Megan knelt, placing fresh daisies on the grass. The twins stood close, each reaching a tentative hand to brush the gravestone. Megan spoke softly, voice trembling. Daniel, these are the girls. They're growing up so fast. And this is Christopher, someone who has come to mean a lot to them. I wanted you to know he's not replacing you. Nobody could ever do that. But he's been kind, and he's helping us keep moving forward. Christopher's throat tightened at her words. He placed a single white lily near the daisies. I wish I had known you, he said quietly, addressing Daniel's memory. The work we're doing now, it's influenced by your ideals more than you realize. I'm sorry for everything that happened. Lily sniffled, eyes brimming with tears. Daddy, she whispered, I wish you could see how we draw pictures. Mommy says you were the best at building stuff. Luna stood silent, tears rolling down her cheeks. She gripped Christopher's sleeve, seeking comfort. He froze momentarily, then gently laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They lingered a while, speaking in hushed tones. Megan wiped away tears, holding each girl close. Christopher stood by, humbled by the raw honesty of this moment, an intersection of past grief and future hope. Later that afternoon, they arrived at Navy Pier, stepping onto the bustling boardwalk. Street performers, cotton candy vendors, and the shining Ferris wheel created a vibrant, if surreal, contrast to the morning's solemnity. Lily and Luna's moods lifted almost instantly. They darted between attractions, giggling at costumed performers and insisting on tasting every flavor of ice cream. At the Ferris wheel's entrance, Christopher and Megan exchanged a tentative smile. Together, they guided the twins into a gondola, taking seats that rose above the city skyline. As the wheel turned, the expansive view of Lake Michigan merged with Chicago's towering buildings. It's beautiful, Megan murmured, glancing at Christopher, who nodded in agreement. Lily pointed excitedly toward the skyscrapers, while Luna sketched them in a small notebook she had tucked under her sweater. In the gondola's soft light, the four of them felt momentarily suspended between earth and sky. The weight of the morning's visit lingered, but the laughter of children and the sense of forward momentum breathed fresh air into their day. Megan rested a hand on Christopher's arm, a silent thank you for his presence. He squeezed her hand gently in return, no words spoken. For a few precious minutes, they simply marveled at the city below, a place where sorrow and joy, regret and hope could coexist in fragile harmony. Several months later, the pilot housing complex was nearing completion. The once vacant lot had been transformed into a cluster of low-rise buildings with communal courtyards. rooftop gardens, and bright murals painted by local youth. Megan Carter's design vision flourished in every corner, from the window boxes brimming with flowers to the small amphitheater for community gatherings. On a warm summer afternoon, Christopher accompanied Megan and the twins on a final walkthrough before official opening ceremonies. The air buzzed with excitement as families began moving into the freshly painted units, children chasing each other in the courtyard. Contractors put finishing touches on railings while volunteers arranged donated furniture in common areas. Lily and Luna raced ahead, squealing each time they discovered a new play nook or colourful wall mural. Megan, now 37, stood quietly in the centre of the courtyard, gazing up at the buildings that represented so many months of relentless effort. Her eyes glistened with tears of relief and pride. Christopher stepped beside her. "You did it," he said softly, admiration evident in his tone. "This is everything you envisioned." Megan turned toward him, a trembling smile on her lips. "We did it," she corrected. "You stood by me, even when the board pushed back, and the community helped shape it too." He nodded, recalling how the fiasco with Thomas Reynolds finally unraveled during the audit. Evidence emerged that Thomas had tampered with invoices, feeding false data to discredit the project. Once uncovered, Thomas was removed from his CFO position, leaving Christopher and Megan freer to move forward. Sandra, for her part, had quietly helped reveal the truth, regaining some peace of mind after her earlier indiscretion. "Kids have a place to belong here," Christopher said, watching Lily and Luna scamper around with a few neighborhood children. "Families can feel secure. That's what this was all about." Megan wiped at her eyes, emotion swelling in her chest. She thought of Daniel, the man whose life ended far too soon, but whose dream of humane architecture lived on through these newly completed homes. Then she looked at Christopher, remembering how he had once been the distant, polished CEO who barely acknowledged social responsibility. Now, he seemed genuinely transformed, transparent about his past mistakes, eager to champion future projects like this one. The twins ran up, breathless from excitement. "There's a rooftop garden," Lily exclaimed. "Can we see it, please?" Luna chimed in, holding her notebook filled with sketches. Megan and Christopher exchanged a fond glance, then nodded, following the girls to the building's top level. Up on the rooftop, a panoramic view of Chicago stretched out. The garden overflowed with raised vegetable beds, blooming flowers, and benches for residents to relax. Lily and Luna hurried to the edge of a safe railing, gazing at the city with wide eyes. Megan walked over, placing a hand on each daughter's shoulder. Christopher stood a step behind, heart full, yet strangely nervous. He'd grown closer to the twins over the past few months, joining them for weekend outings, helping with art projects, and gradually integrating into their home life. But he still sensed that final, unspoken barrier. Would Lily and Luna ever see him as more than Mommy's friend? Just then, Luna turned around, tiny face earnest. "Hey, Christopher," she said hesitantly. "Is it okay if we call you Dad now?" Time seemed to freeze. Megan's breath caught, and Christopher's eyes flooded with tears he could hardly contain. Lily nodded, stepping forward. "We know our real daddy is Daniel," she said softly. "But we like having you, too. We don't want you to go away." His voice cracked. I would be honored," he managed, kneeling down to pull them into a careful hug. Megan watched with a trembling smile, tears trailing down her cheeks. The moment felt surreal, a tender validation of the journey they had all taken, scarred by loss, but bound by renewed hope. They stood there together, a patchwork family woven from past heartbreak and present devotion. Megan moved closer, resting a hand on Christopher's back as the twins clung to him. Beyond the rooftop garden, the city skyline loomed large and bright. For the first time, Christopher saw it not as a monument to power and ambition, but as a testament to people's resilience, to the possibility of building something profoundly human. He rose, slipping an arm around Megan and guiding the girls to the railing. In that instant, the intangible walls separating them finally fell away, replaced by a sense of belonging that no skyscraper, no corporate empire could ever replicate. Under a sunny sky, they gazed out at the horizon, their hearts full of a future built on trust, understanding, and a love that had grown from the most fragile of foundations, now solid as the steel beams beneath their feet. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.